NES Hard wasn't just a phrase, it was standard for most games that came out during the era. Unless, you're playing a Sesame Street game or something. Even Super Mario Bros., the most basic of basic NES games, is harder than you remember it being. And if you can't beat Super Mario Bros. In one sitting, what chance do you have against these super heavyweights? The following games are absolutely notorious for being frustratingly difficult, and it isn't limited to just these. There are loads of games on the console that can cause controller breaking rage. In no particular order, here are 10 of the hardest NES games. Battletoads was released on the NES in 1991 by Rare and was ported to the Genesis, Game Gear, and Amiga consoles. A let's say difficult beat 'em up. You control the Toads Rash and Zitz as they hope to save their brother Pimple and their friend Princess Angelica from the clutches of the Dark Queen. And by clutches, I mean through levels after level of crew obstacles stacked against you from the start. Rash and Zitz can defend themselves just fine with super exaggerated attacks and the use of weapons that can be dropped by enemies. That's not a problem. The problems come in once you get past the first level. If it isn't the enemies, it's the platforming. If it isn't the platforming, it's the turbo bike sections. These stages in particular will weed out most of the casual players, as trying to navigate through the quick approaching walls and pits is way more trouble than you think it is. And on top of that, that's just the third level. There's loads more torture waiting in the wings for you. The game itself and its mechanics are simple, which only compounds the frustration when you inevitably get stuck at a point that drains you until you game over. And with limited lives and continues, it's more likely you're starting over sooner than later. The Adventures of Bayou Billy was released in 1989 by Konami, a hybrid beat-em-up driving and shooting gallery game, all of which will actually beat the piss out of you. I'm not lying about that. Every enemy is so damn hard. Why does it take so long for enemies to die? Why can they drain my health in such a short amount of time? This is the first level. Do I really suck at video games? It cannot be overstated how difficult this game is, starting with the beat-em-up portions. You control Billy, as he's on a journey to save his girlfriend from this rich bastard instead of, calling the police. And yeah, enemies will mess you up very quickly, whether from fists to weapons or even damn crocodiles. This is one of the absolute hardest beat-em-ups you'll come across. And guess what? That's not it. The shooting stages you can use a zapper for, but even in their best days they were unreliable. So what the hell do you think they're going to do now? Better break that controller instead, trying to move a cursor across the screen. And how do you think the driving stages perform of all the other things in this game? Getting shot off the road has never been so easy. Honestly, one section of this game would be enough, but all of these combined together in some kind of unholy fusion makes an absolutely unfriendly grind to get through. Blaster Master is a good game. I have to preface this with that, just so you know this game is well liked, and that will also spit on you. Blaster Master was released on the NES in 1988 by Sunsoft, a hybrid run-and gun and platformer. You control Jason, a random guy who, after chasing his pet frog down the drain, happens upon a tank called Sophia III and is then tasked with finding his now radioactive frog among the mutants inhabiting the underground and take out their mutant leader. Of course, this plot is completely different from the original Japanese version, but whatever, we are here to talk about how difficult this game turns out to be. You shift between two gameplay modes. First, with Jason controlling Sophia and platforming in a 2D space. Sophia is a very mobile tank, being able to move, jump, and shoot in 3 directions with either the standard cannon or the special pickup weapons that can be gained from enemies. Jason can get out of the tank if needed, but it is generally unrecommended due to the fact Jason can be smeared into the dirt quickly. It is required, however, when you come across small entrances which lead to the second gameplay mode, where you control Jason in a top-down shooter, where he must slowly walk around and shoot the various mutants coming for him. Both of these situations present their own difficulty issues, but both share that your health will rapidly get drained, mainly due to platforming and stubborn enemies in the tank and projectiles from mutants out of it. Compounded with a limited amount of lives and continues, and no saving a password for 8 levels, you have yourself a difficult game that will require more than a few restarts to get the hang of. Silver Surfer was released on the NES in 1990 by Software Creations. Based upon the Marvel property of the same name, you control the Silver Surfer as he is tasked with taking out other Marvel supervillains in their own areas, which you can pick and choose the order of. A horizontal and vertical shooter depending on the level, the Silver Surfer auto-scrolls through the levels, able to go in any direction in the plane that he is in, shooting silver pellets at the various enemies that come across the screen. The enemies will usually come up from the opposite side of the screen, and will come with their own projectiles that will cost a life if they hit you. There are power-ups that can be gotten that can change the way you shoot, but that's pretty much it. You get a limited amount of lives to make it through the 3-part levels with a boss at the end, but don't expect to get there if you aren't on your A game. This game is hard, part of which is because a lot can happen on screen at once, and the background doesn't help in distinguishing what is coming toward you. Enemies can spray just as much bullets as Silver Surfer can, and it can get downright nasty at points, with trapping you in between a projectile and the ceiling of the stage that can hurt you as well. It's probably better to continue pressing the button to fire at all times rather than stop, because you don't really know what's coming up next, and if it will have a magic bullet to shoot you out of the sky and set back any type of progress you've made. Frustrating doesn't even begin to cover playing this game for long stretches of time, so suffer if you really want to see the end of the game. Ghosts and Goblins was released in 1995 for arcades by Capcom, and specifically ported to the NES in 1986, among other consoles by Micronix. You control Arthur, Knight of the Kingdom, as he sits around the graveyard in his boxers with the princess. Side note, isn't this a little awkward situation to barge in on? What are they doing out there? Anywho, demon come, kidnaps girl, guy puts on armor and goes to war across 6 different levels of pain. And when I say pain, I mean... Arthur runs in a 2-dimensional plane, shooting weapons at the various Halloween cartoon monsters. He can only take 2 hits from enemies, one that will break his piece of crap armor, and one that will turn him into a skull and bones. What you have to defend yourself is a short rotation of weapons found in hidden chests that have different arcs and deploy speeds, and a stubby little jump. That's all you get against the loads of Satan's minions, including ghosts, zombies, cyclops, and even butthole demons. I mean, demons that act like buttholes, not actual butthole demons. What would that actually look like? The saving grace of this game and its difficulty is that it's only 6 stages. 6 stages of pain, but only 6 stages. What? Illusion World? And I have to go through this again? What the? Yeah, you should have known just trying out this game that it was gonna be rough. And indeed, this game is rough. The whole series has a reputation for torture loving, and Initial Game does not disappoint in that regard. Oh, the old guard of hard, the cream of the extreme, the rough of the tough? Oh, whatever. Contra was released first on the arcade in 1987 and released for the NES in 1988, both by Konami. One of the standards of the run and gun genre, you control Bill Riser and Lance Bean in 2-player mode as they run across the screen, gunning down any enemy alien soldiers or alien threat alike. You can run, jump, and fire your gun, and that's it, barring getting different power-ups from pickups. All of the enemies will be on you like white on rice with bullets, or just running into you, which will both cause instant death. You only get a few lives and a few continues, so you have to be utterly careful with how you play and try not to fall any pits along the way. At the end of each level is a boss which will eat lives if you aren't careful, and you are on to the next level, which is usually a Fox 3D base assault stage, where you must start looking out for bullets in a new dimension. All of these levels are difficult, and combined with the limited amount of grace the game gives you for mistakes, makes this punishingly hard. Now, there's something I should probably address. A lot of people disregard the difficulty of this game because of the widely known Konami code, which gives you 30 lives instead of 3. At that, I say, get good and play the game without it and see if you really want to make that argument. Yes, scrubs. Alright, Castlevania 1 wasn't exactly an easy game, and although some people were disappointed with the way Castlevania 2 was handled, it was still a moderately difficult experience. So with a return to form for Castlevania 3, how did they handle the opposition? Easy! They turned it up to 11 and then broke the lever. Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, was released initially for the NES in 1989 by Konami. A prequel to the previous 2 games, instead of controlling Simon Belmont, we throw it to the past to control his ancestor, Trevor Belmont, who is vampire hunting in the 15th century. He's not alone, however. This game introduces companions that Trevor can meet along the way and join him on his cause. Each have their own special abilities that can be used during gameplay. As they and Simon switch out in the level on the fly, the only one can accompany him at a time. Castlevania 3 also introduces branching paths that can affect what levels are played and potentially what ending can be achieved. You know what else it introduces? Pain, sorrow, and an infinite amount of death. I don't know what in particular tips this game over the edge, be it the additional stages, more difficult enemies, and a punishingly amount of instant death pits, but they all combine to make a fun, yet torturous experience even more treacherous. Getting to Dracula would be a hell of an accomplishment by itself, but then he comes to stomp the rest of your hope out. This Castlevania adventure should be experienced by all, but only the most dedicated should tough it out to the very end. Double Dragon 3: The Sacred Stones was released on the NES in 1991 and was developed as a parallel project to the arcade Double Dragon 3, which it differs from, by Technos Japan. A second sequel to the console beat-em-up genre original Double Dragon. You control Bimmy and Jimmy Lee across the world, beating up dudes, gaining allies, and overall just raising a ruckus. Standard stuff, right? So what would make this game in particular hard even compared to its predecessors? Well, the Sacred Stones decides to emulate real life by having only one life. Yes, one life, no continues, you die, you die. Yes, if you recruit additional teammates, you can switch to them, but the same rules apply. This tweak in gameplay really puts the pressure on the player to not make mistakes, as you don't have a safety cushion anymore to save you. It seems like the enemies know this as well, as they will go for any way to take you out. Cheapness be damned. This is an absolutely brutal affair that will keep players on their toes until they inevitably fall into yet another pit. But throw yourself at this game enough and soon you'll be able to claim the title of Double Dragon Master. Fester's Quest was released on the NES in 1989 by Sunsoft. Based upon the characters of the Addams Family franchise, you control Uncle Fester, the wild card of the family, as he takes his gun to the streets to assault all the alien scum who abducted all the residents of the town in which the Addams Family lives. They didn't get the family though, because of course they didn't. This game is a primarily top-down shooter, with Fester able to use his gun to eliminate all the weird monsters that stand in his way, very slowly. Seriously, Fester takes his sweet time to mosey all down the street. Anyway, defeated enemies drops various goodies such as keys, light bulbs, TNT, and even different weapons that Fester can use to shoot the baddies. You only get 2 life hits at the start, after which you get booted back to the menu. You get a continue option if you don't immediately accidentally hit start, at which case you start at the beginning like before, though you get to keep your current gun and items you've collected. You patrol the town, going in a dark sewer, meeting family members in buildings who will give you stuff, when you basically find a first-person adventure game in your Fester's Quest. Seriously, you navigate around a 3D maze getting items and finding your way out to either a boss or the way out. And these bosses do not mess around, especially with Flatfoot Fester walking about. If Fester could move faster than a snail's pace, it wouldn't be as difficult, but as it stands, Fester's Quest is one of the most frustrating games on the console. The Immortal was released initially in 1990 for the Apple II GS and subsequently ported to the NES in the same year by Electronic Arts. An isometric dungeon crawler, you control a random old wizard as he ventures through the depths of the labyrinth to find his master, the wizard Mortimer, who is called for help. Along the way, the wizard meets many allies and various monster enemies that he must defeat to move forward, both in a third-person view shooting magic from his staff, and in a close-up one-on-one combat mode in which the character starts swinging around a sword. Adventuring around the dungeon is a miserable experience, with traps, pits, and enemies all about. There are even obstacles that can kill the player instantly and not be immediately apparent. Yeah, you have a fireball spell on the overworld, but will a fireball stop a monster Sarlacc from eating you from below? The combat mode is simpler in concept, but it really feels like you're hitting buttons at random to play Rock'em Sock'em Robots against random goblins who want a piece of you. Add in puzzle solving, item gathering, and a general sense of where am I going, and you have an adventurous experience to hell in a handbasket. It wouldn't be too bad in gameplay if it wasn't for the overworld traps that quickly drain your health, and then the sudden death traps that ignore everything and just take a life. You have limited lives, by the way, which will kick you back to the title screen when you fuck up too much. There is a password system, but good luck getting far enough to get a password. Dungeon crawling is already not an easy genre to get into, but the Immortal takes that and throws some extra chaos in, just for fun. Now, almost all of these games I described before, while hard, are actual games. Dragon's Lair on the NES is barely a game, and not even a fun one at that. Dragon's Lair was released first in arcades, then ported to the NES in 1990 by Motive Time and CSG ImageSoft. I say ported very loosely, as Dragon's Lair in the arcade was a beautifully drawn cinematic reaction simulator game with art by Don Bluth, and Dragon's Lair on the NES is a washed out platformer that basically requires you to die to learn how to progress. You may think that's similar enough, but there's a big difference. In the arcade, you get an opportunity to continue on in the game if your reaction speed is quick enough, with the directions flashing on screen giving you just enough time to make a quick move. In the NES game, you are basically thrown to the wolves with obstacles that you couldn't have possibly known about ahead of time if you were playing blind. The stiffness of your hero, Dirk the Daring, makes it almost impossible to be able to avoid obstacles that you can't see coming at least 3 seconds ahead of time. What makes this more infuriating is almost everything kills you in one hit, including pits, projectiles, the door in the first area. Only thing Dirk can withstand is getting hit by bats, and that just takes off a small amount of your health bar. Yeah, you have a health bar, surprisingly. All of this is combined with a small amount of lives to equal a frustratingly hard game that, on top of annoying you, just isn't very fun. You would be well within your right to just avoid this one completely. It just isn't worth it. Have any other games that causes major heart palpitations? Leave them in the comments below. Thank you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and have a good one.